and welcome to the Giving Voice to Depression podcast, brought to you by Recovery.com. Each week we profile a guest who shares intimate details of their mental health journey. They share because they understand that when people don't talk about their depression or other mental health conditions, those of us who struggle with them can feel like we're the only ones, that there's something wrong with us, instead of understanding that we have a common and treatable illness. I'm Terry, the creator and co-host of this podcast.
And I'm Dr. Anita Sands, a licensed clinical psychologist with more than 25 years in clinical practice. I know from both personal and professional experience how significantly mental health and other disorders can impact not just our lives, but those around us as well. By speaking openly and with the wisdom of lived experience, we help normalize conversations that are often avoided due to shame or stigma. Our episodes are honest and real, and we keep them hopeful because there truly is hope, despite what depression tells you.
This podcast is brought to you by Recovery.com, whose mission is to help each person find the best path to recovery through a comprehensive, helpful network of treatment providers for both mental health and addiction treatment worldwide.
We record a couple of new interviews each month, and we also replace some older ones so that our newer listeners don't miss out on some of our best ones. And here's one from the early years when Terry's sister Bridget co-hosted.
Hi, Bridget.
Hi, Terry. Many of our guests on this podcast have said that they wished that they had known about depression earlier, wished that it had been talked about in their families, named, validated, and treated before it affected them for so long or so extremely. Others have called for mandatory mental health education along with physical education in the schools. Again, trying to put mental health and mental illness in the same okay to talk about category that other health-related issues are.
Absolutely. And according to the National Institute of Mental Health, only in the past 2 decades has depression in children been taken seriously. Quoting, they say, because normal behaviors vary from one childhood stage to another, it can be difficult to tell whether a child's just going through a temporary phase or is suffering from depression. Sometimes the parents become worried about how the child's behavior has changed, or a teacher mentions your child doesn't seem to be himself. In such a case, if a visit to a child's pediatrician rules out physical symptoms, the doctor will probably suggest that the child be evaluated, preferably by a psychiatrist who specializes in the treatment of children.
According to another trusted source, WebMD, in an article titled Depression in Children, which we'll link to, says that some children may continue to function reasonably well in a structured environment. Most kids with depression will suffer a notable change in social activities, loss of interest in school, or poor academic performance, as well as potentially a change in appearance. Children may also begin using drugs or alcohol, especially if they're over the age of 12.
Today's guest, TJ, has a simple but important message. We need to talk to our children about mental illnesses when they're young so they can recognize the signs if they experience them. They can support friends who might suffer. And they can understand that those of us parents with mental health struggles can still be productive and loving. Here is TJ giving his voice to depression.
Hello?
Hello. I'm supposed to call you TJ?
Yes.
Are you okay with this?
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to it.
Excellent. Me too. So, TJ, tell me a little bit about yourself before we start, or as we start. I am recording, just so you know.
I'm 43 years old, divorced, father of one amazing son, and I am currently living on disability due to my mental illness. I suffer from depression, anxiety, bipolar, and PTSD.
TJ says he's been battling depression most of his life, starting in his early teens. Yet,
I never really took the initiative to dive into what was really going on with me that was causing me to have, moments where, I was kind of incapacitated, whether it was after the death of somebody close or the end of a relationship. it would just kind of send me into a spiral at times.
It wasn't until persistent suicidal thoughts invaded that he decided he had to get help.
So, roughly at that time, I finally started to discuss my issues with my doctor, my psychiatrist, and my therapist, and they started the roulette of medications of let's try this, let's try that, until we kind of felt like everything was sort of okay.
This next part of TJ's story will be very familiar to those of us who take meds. He was feeling better. His life situation improved as well. So,
and I felt good, and so it was like I don't want pills to make me feel good. I want to feel good on my own, type of machoism type of scenario. So I stopped taking the medications that had been prescribed to me for the depression symptoms that I'd had, which, looking back on it, was not a very good idea. So I was really setting myself up for failure.
Failure, to use TJ's word, was fueled by the loss of his best friend, really stressful changes at work, legal and major medical issues, betrayals, and a divorce. It would be a lot for anyone to handle. Mix in mental illnesses.
I did end up overdosing on prescription medications and ended up spending, the next 10 plus days in a hospital in the psych unit. Mm-hmm. And that was just the beginning that was the first attempt of 5 attempts in 6 months and 6 attempts over 18 months. Mm. And I'll never forget, when you're kind of throwing rocks back and forth at each other with the person that you're separating from. One of the things that I will never forget that was said, it just stuck a knife into my heart. I'll never forget the comment that she made that Connor would often ask her, why does Daddy spend so much time in bed? And you don't realize it when you're doing it. But when you hear that somebody else was affected by it, especially when it's your own child, it crushes you. It absolutely crushed me. So that gave me an indication that he had noticed that there was something different about his dad than everybody else's dad.
Mm-hmm. TJ transformed that pain into the motivation for an all too uncommon parent-child conversation about mental health and the need to openly and shamelessly share feelings as a way of naming and taming them.
Because I wanted him to understand the things that I do deal with and the fact that the things that I deal with are common. That I'm not the only person in the world that's like this, and that it was important for me to tell him that it's okay to talk about your feelings and to share your feelings, because we spend most parents spend most of their time when children are little, discouraging them from sharing their feelings. Basically, if a child cries, we do everything we can to get them to stop. So, we kind of go down the wrong path of encouraging a child to share their feelings. And I want to make sure that I try to reverse that trend with him to where he understands it is okay. It is okay if he needs to cry. It is okay if he's mad about something and he wants to talk about it.
There's also, I'm reading from WebMD, that depression is significantly more common in boys under the age of 10 than girls, and that children with a family history of depression are at greater risk of experiencing it themselves. So I assume on some level it was because this is also part of his family medical history.
And I want to make sure that he knows that whatever he's feeling, whatever difficulty that he may be having, that it's not his fault, that he didn't do anything wrong, and that there are people there and will be there, to love him and support him no matter what he's struggling with and going through.
TJ had been thinking about having that conversation for a while, but it was not planned for that specific weekend. Nor was it anything as formal as, son, sit down, there's something I need to tell you. It was more a matter of seeing and seizing an opportunity when defenses were low.
And I'll never forget. It was that Saturday. We went to pick up a pizza, and before I got out of the car, he looked at me and he started crying, and he said, "I said, son, what's wrong?" And he said to me, he goes, Dad, before I came over, I went up to my room and I laid on my bed and I cried because I began to realize how much you fought to see me again. And you want to talk about having difficulty talking after, hearing something. That definitely put, an apple in my throat for sure. But that kind of made me realize that, okay, he's struggling with emotions. He's, feeling different emotions than he's had in the past. Why wait? Why wait for this conversation? There's no better time than now. When you have an opportunity, when there's an opportunity in front of you that presents itself, when that opening is there, you got to go through it. And that, to me, there was no better time than when the emotions were raw and he was expressing himself, to make sure and reaffirm in him that that's what I want him to do. And that's the right thing to do.
Beyond emotional expression, TJ wanted his son to understand the two illnesses he struggles with most, anxiety and depression.
But I wanted to make sure he really understood what depression was. That, it's more than just feeling sad. That it's not an excuse, that people make just to stay in bed all day. And I explained to him that, do you remember all those times when, I was in the bed for the weekend, or, so many days that you would come home from school when I was in bed? That's part of what depression is and how debilitating it can be. And I wanted to describe it in a way that, you tell him what it is without completely scaring him as well. Yeah. I didn't want to go into blaring, X number of people die each year from, depression or suicide. So I was careful as to what I shared, but I wanted to put it in a way that he understood what I was going through.
What was his reaction?
I think he was surprised, but not as surprised as I thought. So I started to get the feeling or the, burning in my stomach that had me thinking, okay, he already knows. He's already been told about what I have been going through. But he was, I think he was surprised that I brought it up. I think he was surprised with how open I was about it. And I think he was very receptive to the fact that I wanted him to share his feelings, that they're nothing to be ashamed of.
TJ has brought up the topic since to both normalize talking about mental health and to make clear that conversation is no more taboo than any other.
I believe it's no different than any other difficult conversation a parent has with their child. And it's not one that should be or needs to be just a one-time conversation. So I will, continue to educate him. And as he has questions, as I hope he does, I'll answer them as honestly as I can without either glorifying or horrifying mental illness.
Without either glorifying or horrifying mental illness. What a great way to put it. Another insight TJ shares is that parents may need to sacrifice some of their own privacy to make the message valid.
I did reaffirm in him the fact that, that conversation we had, while I wanted to kind of remain between you and I, or he and I, that it's not anything that he should feel like he can't talk to people about, because if I'm ashamed of him talking to other people about it, how am I expecting him to not be ashamed to talk about his feelings with other people? So, I wanted to make sure he understood that if he felt that he needed to talk to somebody else about it, that, he could also do that.
And speaking of walking the talk, TJ also emphasizes that once you encourage your children to share their feelings or symptoms or concerns, you have to be willing to listen without judgment when they take you up on the offer.
And I believe if we start our children at a young age, that eventually we can start to turn the tide on the thing that we fight the most, which is the stigma. And it's gonna come from a way of not fighting against those that are set in their ways. It's going to come from people that were taught at a young age that it's okay. It's okay. These people, the people that have and suffer from a mental illness are really no different than you or I.
They are you and I.
Yeah, exactly. We can't grow up hiding everything from our children. If there are things that we know that could potentially affect them, it's our responsibility to prepare them for those situations. And mental health is just as big a part of that as anything else that we can teach them, whether it be about drugs or sex or anything along those lines. Sometimes I believe we spend too much time focusing on making sure that our kids in school don't bring another life into this world, rather than spending the time on making sure that those lives that are sitting there in front of them are there for the long haul. And I think that that's something else that needs to be changed in the future, but it ultimately starts with us as parents.
I haven't heard that twist on it. I like that.
I did too. I had never heard somebody say that, but it was like, yeah, let's pay attention to the lives in front of us.
And it is nothing short of an act of bravery to reveal one's weaknesses. I'm inspired that, he says, why wait to have that conversation? He's right. If an opening presents and you have a sense that this is, fertile ground to have this tender conversation, that, as he says, you got to go through it.
And I would hesitate to use the word weaknesses, because I don't think of my depression as a weakness of mine. I think of it just as a part of me and an illness. But I agree with you that it's a good thing to do, and at a certain point, it's a brave thing to do. I also love that he said that stigma is going to be broken or diminished, not by trying to get in the heads of people who are set in their ways, thinking that we are lazy or whatever they think, but from teaching kids at a young age that people with mental illnesses are just the same as other people. They just have a different illness than you might have. And that was the same lesson that the leading stigma researcher, Dr. Patrick Corrigan, told us. He said it's not going to be teaching kids in school or teaching anyone. It's going to be having them realize that their father, their friend, their anybody has got anxiety, depression, whatever they have, and that they're lovable and productive and loving and all those things.
Right. And you didn't even know, and now you do, and
right.
It shouldn't change all that much. My kids didn't know until we did this podcast, and I had them listen to it.
Me too. Yeah. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, he's brave. Thank you. Thank you, TJ.
Really appreciate it and the lesson, and I hope that parents or aunts and uncles or grandparents or siblings, anybody who's listening to this, realizes that conversation could be a real important step in making everybody feel okay about whatever it is they're feeling, whatever it is they suffer from or are battling.
We truly hope that our podcast brings a little more understanding, helps you better articulate and reflect on your own experience with depression, or better understand how to support someone else who is struggling.
If this episode has been of comfort or value to you, know that there are hundreds of others like it in our archive, which you can easily find at our website, givingvoicetodepression.com. And remember, if you're struggling, speak up, even if it's hard. If someone else is struggling, take the time to listen.